This is Duke University.
Reading, Writing, and Fighting. Today we talk with Brothers Writing to Live and Professor Elaine Richardson about loving, living, and literacy. I'm Anthony Neal, and this is Left of Black.
Yeah. Eric, you're a real life G for this one. Yeah.
Welcome to Left of Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal, and we are joined today by Professor Elaine Richardson, Professor of Literacy Studies in the Department of Teaching and Learning at The Ohio State University. She's the author of several books, including African American Literacy, 2003, and Hip Hop Literacies, 2006. But we are here talking with Professor Richardson today about her new book, PhD to PhD, How Education Saved My Life. Of her new memoir, the legendary Geneva Smitherman has written, her story is that of many thousands gone and the still lingering effects of colorism and linguistic shame that has left its mark on both women and men in our communities. The legacy of the African Holocaust, neo-enslavement, and U.S. apartheid. And Detroit's own Dream Hampton, and a friend of Left of Black, writes, to call her story inspiring would be itself too plain a thing. Hers is a heroic life. How are you doing today, Elaine?
I'm blessed. Thank you so much.
And so I don't even know where to begin with this interview. This amazing memoir. And so first, let's unpack for the audience from PhD to PhD. You know, we know that you're Professor Elaine Richardson, so we get the other PhD, but talk a little bit about that first PhD.
It stands for POHO on Dope. A lot of people tried to talk me out of that title, and for a minute they were winning. But I finally decided to stick with that title because the whole point of me writing the book, first of all, I should say that this is the book that I wanted to write for my tenure book as an assistant professor. But, you know, I didn't think that they would accept it. Matter of fact, I knew they wouldn't accept it because I had to write something that was a revision of my dissertation. Yeah. So this is sort of like the vernacular version of African American literacies.
Yeah.
Because, you know, your research is always about you. But it's more grounded in where I come from as far as in the hood of Cleveland, Ohio, and a lot of the foundational experiences that affected, you know, my getting into prostitution as a teenager and as a young adult, and ultimately, well, not ultimately, but also becoming a PhD professor. So I wanted to be as transparent as I could possibly be so that people from those type of background experiences that I had will understand that, you know, nobody can really stop you from being what you, something that's planted in you, your talents, your gifts, that you know, no matter what kind of experiences that you've had, nobody is better than you. And a lot of people have had traumatic experiences and have still been able to be somewhat of who they want to be.
To be honest, I mean, when I think about the struggles you had in terms of the titling and folks who wanted to change the title, there's really no way to sugarcoat this story. I mean, you know, this is a story of someone who at 12, 13, 14 years old is already working the street. You know, this is the story of someone, you know, who is trying to balance going to high school and going to college with, you know, literally working the streets in a real significant kind of way. There's no way to make this go down easy, right? I mean, this is a real story. This is real talk. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you, you know, as I'm reading this and trying to process this myself, how was it for you to go back and have to relive, you know, this story, and think about all that happened, in your life. I mean, you lived 4 or 5 lifetimes by the time, you go back to school at age 27, right? I mean,
Right.
those first 27 years itself, right, was worthy of a couple of volumes of book and a couple of films. So talk about what it was like for yourself to have to go back and relive this, if you will.
Um, you know what? It was very painful. I did not realize um, that it would still be as emotional for me recalling some of those experiences um, until I really started writing it. And I cried a lot when I was writing it. And I cried for myself. I cried for people I knew who got killed. I
Mm.
cried for my younger self. I cried for some of my boyfriends, some of my pimps, people who are dead now, my parents. I cried for so many things and for so many people. So it was very therapeutic writing it. And I think about something that Terry Williams said when she was here in Columbus talking about Black pain. It just looks like we're not hurting. We don't get counseling
Mm.
uh,
Mm.
or therapy for a lot of things. We just keep living. And I just lived over a lot of things and just kept pushing through life. And it was a way of making me go back and even mourn for people that I'd really probably never properly mourned for and mourned for
Mm.
myself too. So it was something. It's still something.
We're here with Elaine Richardson, professor at Ohio State University. We're talking about her new book, From PhD to PhD. And for those of you who haven't figured it out, the first PhD is Poho on Dope, How Education Saved My Life. One of my guilty pleasures is the BET show The Game. And it's not, great television, but it's entertaining, and there's so many aspects of it that kind of speak to ourselves. And of course, there's the main character, one of the main character, who's the mother of the quarterback. And as this season came to an end, she goes into counseling, and there's this wonderful moment. I would argue one of the best moments that the show has had since it's been on the air, when you're seeing her on the therapist's couch, and it's her 14-year-old self who's about to have this child. It's her 21, 22-year-old self, who's the mother of this 8-year-old boy, and it's her adult self. And I'm wondering for you, Elaine, if you could go back to sit down and have a conversation, as you just kind of suggested, with your 13-year-old self and with your 27-year-old self and with your grown-ass, fly-ass self, in 2013, what would that conversation look like?
um, wow. In so many ways, Mark, I feel like just recently, within the last 5 years, maybe, that I really accept myself, that I really understand my beauty, um, that I was looking for other people to see my beauty for a long time. And it's just been within these last, I would say, 5, 6 years that I really feel like I know who I am and who I want to be. So I would tell my younger self that, I might not know who I am, but I know I ain't no hoe. As far as being made to feel like you just here for um, as a second class person for other people's wishes and not for myself. Because I never really fully owned myself when I was younger. And so I allowed other people to own me. And when I say allowed, I don't want that to sound like, because sometimes when people it's so hard, you get trapped in language, but it's hard to talk about women and girls who are in abusive and addictive situations because a lot of people say, well, that was your choice. You chose to do this, you chose to do that.
Yeah.
But at 12 and 13, I don't think you understand the choices that you're making, and you don't really know that you're traumatized. You're just trying to look for that, whatever comfort that is, whatever fitting in with people and feeling like somebody desires you. So I would just say to my younger self that, I'm all right. I'm all right. Even though things have happened to me, I'm not, worthy. I'm worthy. I am worthy.
the book is not really simply about you telling this story, right? I mean, the book is actually doing some real intellectual work, a lot of it around the work that you do as a scholar, around learning and literacy. How important was it for you to be able to sit down and order your thoughts? And you mentioned, this wasn't a tenure book, so you could write this any way you wanted to. How is important was for you to be able to order your thoughts? And I remember, the professor who told you at some point that you have a voice, right? And you have this right to express the voice that you want to. How important was for you to be able to order your thoughts, to be able to tell this story in the voice that was most natural to you? And what do you say for those women and even men, who've gone through this kind of trauma that don't have the option, whether in writing or musical form, which is something that you also have taken advantage of? What do you say to those folks who don't really have an outlet to be able to deal with the trauma they've experienced in their life, emotional or otherwise?
That it's so important to have somebody that you can talk to, somebody that you trust, that is not going to take advantage of you and who can validate you. Um, I really just had therapy within the last 5 years and was able to be honest about a lot of things. Now, I used to tell my daughters when they were little that, mommy used to be out there. I was working the street. We would be riding past, urban area, and we would see, girls working the streets. And I would always tell my daughters not to laugh or talk about people that are out there, because I used to be out there. Yeah. And nobody wants to be a hoe. And we don't know how they got out there. But I would say for people who've been in traumatic experiences, that you gotta find somebody that you trust, that you can talk to about your deepest fears, your deepest hurts, because so much we blame and carry a lot of stuff around with us that we don't need to carry around, but it's got to be unpacked. We got to get it off our chest. And as far as like writing the book and finding my voice, it took quite a few drafts for me to get to where I, because some of it was like I had it right the first time, and then I let people read it, and they would say stuff like, "Oh, but, I don't understand this. I know you're writing in Ebonics, but what does this mean?" Because people, and these would be Ebonics speakers. But people are not really used. Some people are not really used to reading it, reading Ebonics. So, I went back and forth a few times, and then my girlfriend Mary Weems, who is a creative writer, because I don't really, even though I'm a songwriter, I don't really claim myself to be a creative writer. But I just wrote what I heard and what I remembered. Yeah. And and after I let some people read it, and they would, tell me, well, I don't know if I got this. I would change stuff, and I let Mary read it again, and she was like, you messed this up. Go back to how you had it the first time. Right. That's the way God gave it to you. And so I went back and, wrote what I heard and what I remembered, and parts of, my history and who I am. And maybe there were some other parts that that were not so much recalling scenes from my life, so like the part in the book where I really talk about language and power. Yeah. And I get into things that I learned from Geneva Smitherman and from critical linguistics. I tried to make that, conversational, because I think the first time I wrote that, it sounded too academic-y. Yeah. So I did. So some people read that part and did help me to like, now I need you to break this down. Because one thing I always remembered about reading Malcolm X is that all of his ideas, anybody who read his book could understand it. Right. And so I wanted to be like that, where even though I'm talking about something real heavy, it doesn't have to sound like you getting theoretical or too scientific or something. So it was a process. And I think we all have something inside of us and some talents that God has given us, athletically or some other way that we can express who we are. So I don't want to say people don't have a voice because maybe they can't sing or write, but they got something. They got some way that, it might be a different way but I would encourage them to believe in themselves and understand that there's somebody else out there that has something similar. It might not be like in my case, it was, seeing my parents have this really horrible fight when I was 5 or 6 years old and feeling like something was wrong with my family. Um, it might not be, that um, those kind of traumatic experiences, whatever their traumatic experiences are, that they can heal from those things, and that they have something inside of them that's special that other people can latch on to and say, hey, I had some issues, and this person inspires me, from being real about what happened to them and expressing it however they can.
You're watching Left to Black, and we're here with Elaine Richardson, who's a professor of literacy studies in the Department of Teaching and Learning at The Ohio State University. The author of several books, including African American Literacies and Hip Hop Literacies, and we're talking with Professor Richardson today about her brand new book, a memoir, PhD to PhD, How Education Saved My Life. How has your family responded to the book, Elaine, particularly your three daughters, reading about who you were, when you were their age and younger? What's been the response from your family?
Well, they encouraged me a lot because, like I said, I used to tell my daughters when they were little, that I was out there, because I never wanted anybody to be able to hurt them by saying, oh, your mama used to be a hoe, or your mama was a drug addict, or, a junkie. So I used to tell my daughters when they were little stories about things that happened to me out there. And some of those stories are in the book. And especially my oldest daughter, she would bring her friends over and she would say, Ma, tell us one of your hoe stories, And so my daughter's friends always thought I was just like the coolest mother on the planet, because I would tell them these things that happened to me when I was younger. And most of the time I would tell them in a way that was funny. But some of them were, hard to talk about. Um, but I felt like I had to tell my daughters those stories, and I had to be honest with them about, who I was. And they would always say, Ma, I just can't see you out there. I just, for real, Ma, you was really on the corner. You was really all the way out there. But they can't see it. They can't see it, even though they know it's true. But I think now that the book is in writing and they've read it, it's been, kind of painful for them, but still they're very proud of me. And that's what, they always tell me. They cried through it. They laughed on certain parts. And they've all said, Ma, I am just so proud of you. And that means a lot to me.
We live in a society that, on the one hand, makes it its business to shame Black folks, to shame women, in particular, to shame Black women.
Yeah.
And if you were to talk a little bit about this kind of element of shame, particularly in relationship to your Caribbean background. I mean, your mother is almost a co-starring role throughout the book. Folks, I felt as though I could literally hear your mother. Whether it was, you writing through her patois and the kind of forcefulness in which she envisioned your life for you. Talk a little bit about that element of shame as you're working through, this life that you did.
I think that another reason why, it took me so long to write this book is because I waited until I was a full professor to write the book. Mm-hmm. Because I knew that, a lot of, people in my department, my colleagues, certain people in the field, they not
clutching pearls, right?
Right. So, I don't even know if they understand what I'm doing. I'm pretty sure they don't. Yeah. Some people get it and some people don't get it. And, it's been very hard. I can just tell by how people respond to me. They'll say, oh, congratulations on your new book, but they don't really know what else to say about it. I'm talking about academics, at my institution in particular, because they don't realize why I wrote it like I wrote it,
right.
And why it's important educationally, even though it's got a lot of the urban fiction element to it.
Right.
Um, just because of the content, because it's a lot of urban content and drug use and prostitution and all that kind of stuff is in there. But for the audiences that I want people to realize, a lot of people are coming from backgrounds that are not pretty. When you come from the ghetto, when you come from poverty, you are exposed to a lot of things that people in the middle class or middle class neighborhoods or people who are insulated are not exposed to those things. Not that everybody in poverty has been involved in those things, but if they haven't, they've either had somebody in their family be killed or incarcerated or, so a lot of people can understand my story, and I'm inviting those people to know that there's nobody up in this institution any better than you, even though, we might feel that we're not, the person who the institution is designed for. They can't keep us out. They can't hold us back. Don't let people hate on you because of your past or, things that have happened or might still be happening in your family or in your community, that we got to get up in here and change things for ourselves. And we have something valuable to bring to the academy. I think I might have forgot the first part. Oh, the shame part. So that, so yeah, some things that happen to us, we don't, necessarily want to share. But I shared mine because I don't want people to feel like they're any less than anybody else. Because I felt like that for a long time.
Right.
One of the things that I didn't understand when I was a little kid, because there were no Jamaicans in our neighborhood. So people used to always ask me, is your mama from Puerto Rico? Why y'all food smell funny? Why y'all mama talk funny? And so I would try to avoid, once people pointed them out to me, things like I'd say "et" instead of "ate." Like I ate this, and I would say I ate this. So there were certain things that people would question me about my speech or about, the way our food smelled. And those things were sort of a point of shame when I was younger because I wanted to fit in with people in my neighborhood.
Right.
Nobody was from Jamaica, in my neighborhood. Everybody was from Alabama. Their parents were from Georgia or Mississippi. So I didn't fit in so I always felt like I didn't fit in. And so that's one thing, that's now I'm ashamed that I felt that way because I know better. Another thing that was shameful for me is that I feel like I shamed my parents and my family. I was ashamed of them like I said, when I was younger and didn't know any better about who I was. But at some point, I knew that I shamed my family because I knew that something was expected of me to be something, to make something of my life. And I felt like I was letting down everybody.
Talk a little bit about the importance of Geneva Smitherman. Here's a woman who, for all intents and purposes, practically created the field of Black sociolinguistics as we know it in 2013. How important was she to your life?
Man, she taught me so much, not only content-wise, but how to be a Black woman in the academy and feel all right with who I am. Dr. G was never in the street life or anything like that, but it was her own mission was to groom young Black scholars. And she understood where people might be coming from, which is the hood.
Real talk. I don't think I've ever met anybody who cussed like Dr. G does.
And she was right for me. She was right for me.
Yeah.
She could break down critical linguistics for you and talk about language and power and monolingual ideology and critical linguistics, and then on the other hand, and say something that was real sister girl and real, Black cultural.
Yeah.
She had some serious code switching going on, and she was rooted and grounded in Black liberation,
Right.
and also
Right.
she knew linguistic theory from top to bottom. So just knowing that I didn't have to like really try to fake the funk and be somebody that I wasn't. She told me I needed all that. She was like, all that where you came from, your street code, you need that up in here because there's some snakes up in here. And you need all of that wisdom and knowledge, the street knowledge that you have. You need that in here. Don't try to cut yourself off,
right.
your old self off from what you're learning because you need that. And so that was a really powerful lesson for me being with her because that's why I did hip hop literacies and that's why I did African American literacies because people with Black people, especially, they feel like you have to unlearn Ebonics. You have to cut yourself off from Black history or Black culture or Black ways of knowing to learn so-called standard English. And that's so not true.
Yeah.
If you speak some other languages, they do still have a monolingual, my ideology. Like if you learn English, you don't need to learn anything else, or you don't need to know anything else. But they will accept other people's languages more so than Ebonics.
Right.
And that's even with Creoles. They'll accept other, you see how they did Rachel Jeantel.
Right.
And they kept bringing up, well, we know that you're Haitian, and they talked to her like she was somehow less intelligent because of that. But that was such a big lesson for me in culturally relevant language and literacy, is to understand that people don't have to erase their brain with their home language to be able to acquire or learn some other language or some academic discourse.
Absolutely.
But Geneva Smitherman has so much integrity. And I judge, and I'm gonna be honest, I judge people based on what I learned from her because she was traveling a lot when I was her TA. She would be any place in the world, and if people contacted her and needed her to do something, even if she couldn't do it, she would make us respond to people and make us help. She was just not one of those people that, just because she was well respected and, gone, that she wouldn't respond to people.
Yeah.
And, she just had a different kind of integrity. And it just taught me so much about how to be a woman, a Black woman in the academy.
We've been joined today by Professor Elaine Richardson, who's a professor of literacy in the Department of Teaching and Learning at The Ohio State University, the author of several books, African American Literacies, Routledge 2003, Hip Hop Literacies, Routledge 2006, and the author of the brand new memoir, PhD to PhD, that would be Poho on Dope to PhD, How Education Saved My Life. It is always a pleasure to spend some time with the always brilliant and the always fly Elaine Richardson. Thanks a lot for joining us, sis.
And can I give us just a shout out real quick?
No problem.
I can never thank Dream Hampton enough. I love her so much for, taking her time to read my text and to give the comment that she gave. It meant everything to me.
Absolutely. Take care of yourself.
Thank you. Love you, brother.
Welcome to Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal, and I'm joined today by three African-American men, Black men, all writers. Wade Davis, former NFL player, activist. Kai Green, activist, filmmaker, PhD student. And Darnell Moore, activist and just all-around organizer extraordinaire. I'm so thankful that the three of you have come on the show. We all have been involved, myself more loosely than you have, in a project called Black Men Writing to Live. Had the opportunity to talk to our man, Kiese Layman, and of course he has published in his new collection, How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others, letters that were written between several of you. Talk a little bit about this project, and why it's important to identify ourselves as Black men writing to live. And I'll start with you, Darnell.
Sure. First, thanks for having us on the show. This is amazing for all of us to be joining together this way. But really, the idea for the collective or collaborative or community came about by a Facebook conversation with Kiese and I. And he was interested in publishing a few of our pieces on Gawker, which he edits true stories.
Right.
And what we discovered, at least through something that I have written and Kiese had written and Michael Denzel Smith, another brother who writes with us, and even Marlon Peterson, that we all had some traces of what one might call traumas in our lives. And all of our writing had in some way addressed those traumas. And each of us had been seeming to use writing as a tool to overcome that. So that was the thing that drew us together. And we started thinking about other folks like you and Kai and Wade, whose writing also impacts us and similarly is doing the same type of thing, and asked folk if we want to be interested in writing together. And that's really how this started. We have been going out into the community, academic spaces, reading our work publicly because we feel that literacy is actually a tool of healing.
You know, one of the things that's been very important about the project, and I would even say exciting, is that so much of it has taken the form of letter writing. And in some ways, letter writing is really an old form for this generation. I mean, we've all been doing email and now Twitter and now Facebook and all this kind of stuff. We don't write letters. And how important has it been to take this particular form of writing, Kai, you know, and use it for 21st century designs, if you will?
Well, you know, letter writing for me, we go way back because I grew up with my dad incarcerated for a lot of my life. And so every weekend, my mom would sit me down and it was like, time to write your dad. And that's really one of the first ways I ever got to meet my dad and love my dad, because he was able to, my dad is an amazing letter writer. And, you know, I say that I learned to write through that relationship, through that sort of every week, sit down and write your dad. And he would tell me about his dreams, what was going to happen when he came out. Now, what happened, who knows? But those letters, which I still have, are so valuable. And it was really, really important for me to engage in this activity with these brothers, because letter writing has always been sort of a way that I have connected with men in my life.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're here with members of Black Men Writing to Live, Darnell Moore, Kai Green, Wade Davis. You know, there's a whole history in this country of Black men who write. We could be talking about Ellison, the late, just late, Albert Murray, Richard Wright. I mean, we could go on and on, Paul Beatty. I mean, there's great examples of this. But there are still folks in America that get confused, you know, with the idea that Black men, write and Black men read. But Wade, you take this connection to a whole nother level in terms of thinking about athletes who write, and in this case, Black athletes that write. So talk a little bit about your experience of trying to balance the demands of being an athlete and also thinking of yourself as a writer.
Well, it's interesting because I never considered myself as a writer. Darnell Moore has pushed me to write more and more and more, and it's something that I'm trying to embrace. I just consider myself a person who has an interesting story, and I really understand that the sharing of stories really works to change hearts and minds. And I think in my case, it helps to re-understand and redefine how we view athletes. I think oftentimes athletes are viewed as Neanderthals or someone who just has a talent to play a sport, and that's it. So being a chance to write with you amazing brothers is really helping to reframe how we view athletes.
You know, it's a couple of things that your comments make me think of, Wade. Ishmael Reed, who can be problematic in so many different ways. But, you know, he has this line simply that a writer writes. You know, that if you write, you're a writer, right? Whether or not someone decides to say, oh, you're a writer and pat you on the back of the head or not, if you're writing, you're a writer. But it also makes me think of the case of, say, a figure like Bernie Casey, you know, who's a football player in the 60s and the 70s, you know, eventually becomes a great, you know, Black actor. And, you know, he talks about that when he was on the road playing in the 60s, you know, when, you know, this is before their video games, right? So cats ain't gonna be playing video games for 12 hours, you know, when they're not on the field. He would go to art museums and he developed a taste and a critical sensibility around art and began to paint himself. You know, and it confused folks because when we're thinking about the, you know, the brawny football player, particularly of that era, the last thing we're thinking about is someone who's going to become an art critic, you know, and a painter in their own right. And so I say all that to say that much of this work that we've been doing really is expanding the range of what we think of as Black masculinity. And so, Darnell, I'll go back to you. You know, what were you really hoping that this work will do? You know, obviously for all of us, right? Because I think, and we've all had this experience of reading each other's letters and each other's work and being like, wow. You know, on the one hand, it's like the fact that there is someone who's worked through these kinds of issues, I feel like I'm in a community, but this stuff that's just so powerful that you can't help but go, that was simply amazing. But what are you hoping will be the kind of public impact of this work?
Yeah, I thought it was important, one, that as Black men, we begin to articulate on our own terms without always having to put the burden on women to teach us about sexism, to teach us about patriarchy and rape culture, to teach us really about ourselves. And for me, I felt like what it does when we rely so heavily, and it's just not to problem it. Like, I'm not trying to, I want to lift up the fact that our Black feminist sisters particularly have really informed, at least in my life, and I'm assuming all of our lives, our politics. But it felt like, you know, there's a way in which we have to take ownership of our own issues, our stuff, and begin to articulate politics on our own terms. And by that, it's like not to turn Black women easily into mothers all over again, right? At what point can we sit down and begin to critique ourselves, to celebrate ourselves, and do so in community with folk who are vastly different too? This is a community of Black, cis, and trans men.
Right.
And I think it's important to sort of like C. Riley Norton talked about, like to remove Black masculinity from male bodies, right? Like to also think about masculinities as they might exist, and gender overall across a range of bodies and a range of experience. Third, we come from all walks of life, and we exist in various parts of the country, from like Mississippi to Camden. You know, we're working in academic institutions to the street corners, but we all have found in our conversation similarities. It makes sense to me then that if we can get brothers to begin to model what we're trying to do through letter writing in our various communities, we can overcome so many of the barriers that keeps us apart. And I think that that's important, to demonstrate that we, as variously identified men, can address the issues that are not only impacting us, but issues that we are also complicit in the ways in which they're impacting so many other people.
Kai, you know, having been involved in this work so far, what has been the thing that's most surprised you in terms of the public response to this work?
In terms of the public response, I mean, I really appreciate all the love. I think we've received lots of love and lots of affirmation, and I think people are hungry right now for a different kind of masculinity, especially Black masculinity. And so I feel really affirmed in this project. I think just to piggyback off of what Darnell was saying, it's important that we push what Black masculinity means for us right now, and what does it mean to be Black men who are also feminists, who are also invested in this. And I oftentimes think about, you know, where are the Black feminists? And I look at this group and I see, oh, here we are, because a lot of us, you know, the people that we would look up to, like if we think of the Joseph Beam or Marlon Riggs, all of these people were Black male feminists, cultural producers, artists, filmmakers, and a lot of them died. And so what do you do when you don't have that older generation to teach us? How do we sort of come together and say, we still want more, we still care about what it means to be a Black man, and our relationship to our manhood is not sort of dependent on subjecting a woman or subjecting femininity. So how do we really grapple with masculinity that is whole and holistic and not violent?
You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined today by men representing Black men writing to live. Wade Davis on the far right, Kai Green in the middle, and Darnell Moore on the left. And Wade, let me go to you for a second. You know, we're in a particular interesting historical moment. You know, first Black president, the Trayvon Martin case is out there. We continuously get back to this narrative of Black men being under assault. And in this context, it's often very easy to celebrate Black men under a rubric of what I'll call lowered expectations. Like if we can walk and talk and hold a job at the same time, folks want to have parties and parades for us, right? And there's something enticing about this kind of work because we're trying to be progressive around issues in gender and sexuality, that it's real easy, particularly in the social media world, for folks to pat us on the back and say, great job. And it's real easier for us to get comfortable in doing that kind of work. How do we push past these lowered expectations for Black men, to really push for some really transformative politics that don't just make us and those like us who, in the same choir, if you will, feel good about ourselves?
I think one of the first things that I do and that I've learned is to define myself for myself, to not allow others' expectations of me and for me dictate the work that I do in this world. I'm really a person who sees and is working to understand my own privilege. And within that, I'm trying to make sure that I create spaces for other Black men and women and really individuals of all colors to be able to show up, to rework that actual narrative that all we can do is play a sport, or spit a couple rhymes, So I think one of the biggest impacts of this campaign is to really show Black men in a different light, and really see that we are showing up, from all different sexualities and identities, and say, hey, we are here. So you all need to make sure that you're giving us the actual space to prove to you that we're not a monolith.
Over the summer, we had the chance to work with Esther Armah as part of her emotional justice campaign. And this is for any of you who want to jump in on this. I mean, how important is it to be able to set up these structures, to be able to do real collaborative work, with other folks who are trying to get at this different kind of political and cultural space for us?
I think for me, it's really important, community is important for any type of transformative justice work. And I think that community is like one of those words that can be bankrupt of its meaning. And, we talk about community, we talk about justice to the point that these things merely become rhetorics, and they become empty. And I find this work particular where we're actually trying to model community, coming together from our various contexts for the purpose of seeking not only like an individual healing, but that individual healing happens by being in community with some others. And that's important for me anyway. I think it's important for us to struggle together, right? I think it's important for us to sort of articulate our life worlds in community. I think it's important for us to imagine a new world and the solutions that can actually produce that world together. And we can't do it alone. And it just means so much for me as a Black gay man who has always sought out affirmation from his brothers. I've always just wanted like some brothers just to accept me as I am, to be able to be in a space where at the end of the day, the very thing that might have otherwise disrupted my relationships is now like it's inconsequential in the work that we're trying to do together. And that's been a blessing to me anyway.
We've been joined today by Black men writing to live. Darnell Moore, Kai Green, Wade Davis. We're going to give a digital shout out to Michael Denzel Smith, Kieze, Layman, and Marlon Peterson. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Eric, you're a real life G for this one. Yeah. All Black everything, all Black, all Black in the name of all my Black heroes, all Black everything, all Black polos, all Black medallions, yeah, all Black, say, all Black everything, all Black, all Black in the name of all my Black heroes, all Black everything, all Black polos.